In the winter of 1237, a Russian scout rode through the snow toward the city of Ryazan. What he saw made him turn his horse around and gallop straight back through the gates. On the horizon, as far as he could see, was an army. Not thousands, tens of thousands. Mounted, silent, and closing fast. Within 6 days, Ryazan would not exist. This is the story of the Golden Horde. How a splinter of Genghis Khan's empire conquered the largest country on earth, ruled it for 2.5 centuries, and left scars on Russian culture, politics, and identity that some historians argue are still visible today. To understand how this happened, you have to understand what the Mongols actually were by the 1230s. Genghis Khan had died in 1227, but the empire he built didn't stop moving. It kept expanding under his sons and grandsons, and one of those grandsons, Batu Khan, was given command of the westernmost armies, the ones aimed at Europe. Batu's forces weren't a horde in the chaotic sense the word implies today. They were the most disciplined, best coordinated military force on the planet. Every rider had multiple horses, allowing them to switch mounts and cover extraordinary distances without exhausting any single animal. Their composite bows could outrange most European weapons, and their command structure, organized in units of tens, hundreds, thousands, and 10,000s, allowed commanders to coordinate movements across hundreds of miles with a precision that wouldn't be matched in Europe for centuries. Russia at this point wasn't a unified country. It was a patchwork of rival principalities. Kiev, Vladimir, Novgorod, Ryazan, that spent as much time fighting each other as cooperating. That fragmentation was about to become fatal. Batu Khan's army crossed into Russian territory in the winter of 1237, and the timing was deliberate. Everyone else in Europe waited for rivers to thaw before campaigning. The Mongols did the opposite. They used the frozen rivers as highways, letting their cavalry move fast across terrain that would have been an impassable swamp in summer. Ryazan was first. Its prince refused to pay tribute, and the city was besieged and destroyed in December 1237. Contemporary chronicles describe the destruction in stark terms. The city was burned, and the population was largely killed. From there, the Mongols moved methodically. Moscow, then a small fortified town, fell next. Then Vladimir, one of the most powerful principalities in Russia, was overrun in February 1238. Then something unexpected happened. The Mongols turned around and headed back to the steppe. Historians still debate why. Exhausted horses, spring mud that would have bogged down the cavalry, or simply that the campaign had achieved its goals for the season. Most likely some combination of all three. They came back in 1239 and finished the job, and in 1240 Kiev, the symbolic heart of the Russian principalities, fell after a brutal siege. By 1240, Mongol authority stretched from the steppes of Central Asia to the edge of Central Europe. Here's where the story gets more interesting than just, and then they conquered everything. The Mongols didn't stick around to govern Russian cities directly the way you might expect a conquering empire to. Instead, they set up what's called the Golden Horde, based not in Russia itself, but on the steppes to the south and east, with its capital eventually at Sarai, near the Volga River. The name Golden Horde likely comes from the golden color of the Khan's ceremonial tent. Horde itself comes from the Mongolian and Turkic word ordu, meaning camp or headquarters. It wasn't a slur or a description of chaos, it was a royal court that happened to be mobile. Instead of installing Mongol administrators in every Russian city, the Golden Horde ran an indirect system. Russian princes kept their titles and their local power, but only if they traveled to Sarai, groveled before the Khan, and received a yarlik, a patent of authority that confirmed them in their position. Refuse, and the Khan would simply back a rival prince instead. This is the arrangement historians call the Tatar yoke, Tatar being the term used at the time for the Mongol and Turkic peoples of the Horde. Princes became tax collectors for a foreign power. Regular censuses were conducted to calculate tribute. Russian cities that resisted or fell behind on payment faced punitive raids. This wasn't a brief occupation. The Golden Horde's dominance over Russian lands lasted from the 1240s until 1480, nearly 240 years, and it fundamentally reshaped Russian politics. Princes who were willing to cooperate closely with the Horde, collecting tribute efficiently, currying favor at Sarai, tended to be the ones who gained power over their rivals. The most successful of these collaborator princes were based in a minor town that the Mongols themselves had largely spared, Moscow. Historians have long argued that Moscow's rise to dominance over the other Russian principalities was, in part, a direct result of its princes playing the Mongol system better than anyone else, using Mongol backing to crush rival cities, then gradually absorbing their territory. In other words, the very city that would later liberate Russia from Mongol rule built its power using Mongol authority in the first place. The horde didn't just take tribute, it also periodically intervened militarily, backing whichever prince served its interests most and punishing those who didn't. Uprisings were crushed. Cities that refused tribute were sacked. By the 15th century, the Golden Horde itself was fracturing. Internal succession struggles split it into smaller khanates, Kazan, Crimea, Astrakhan, each going its own way. Meanwhile, Moscow, having spent 2 centuries consolidating power, was strong enough to stop playing along. The symbolic end came in 1480 at the Great Stand on the Ugra River. Ivan III of Moscow and the forces of what remained of the Golden Horde faced off across the river for weeks. And then, without a major battle, the Mongol force simply withdrew. No dramatic climactic battle, just an empire that no longer had the strength to enforce 2.5 centuries of dominance, quietly conceding that the balance of power had shifted for good. So what did 240 years of Mongol rule actually leave behind? Historians still argue about this. Some downplay Mongol influence on Russian culture, others see it everywhere. In the centralized, autocratic style of governance that later Russian and Soviet leaders would use, in certain administrative and taxation practices, even in vocabulary. Plenty of Russian words related to trade, administration, and horses trace back to Turkic and Mongol roots. What's not in dispute is the political outcome. The Golden Horde's system of indirect rule accidentally built the conditions for Moscow's rise, and Moscow's rise built the foundation of the country we now call Russia. An army that arrived to destroy a fragmented set of rival principalities ended up, over 2.5 centuries, being one of the forces that unified them into a single state. Just not the one anybody in Ryazan in 1237 would have predicted. If you want the next one in this series, let me know in the comments which area you want covered next.